Good afternoon, Covenant Baptist Church. Welcome back to our podcast as we spend 2025 and 2026 reading the Bible together. This week we started the book of Deuteronomy. If you'd like to catch up on our previous books of the Bible, you can go to www.covenantbaptistchurch.com/read-the-Bible, and we'll see you there. So, Deuteronomy. You'll notice the covenantal symbol here. That is because it is a covenantal book. And you may wonder how it gets its name. We're in now the fifth book of the Torah, the first five books of the law of the Old Testament. Genesis, as we know, gets its name from beginnings. Exodus is going out from, obviously, exit, we can see that. Leviticus is tied to the Levitical tribe, the Levites. It is a book about the law and specifically things relating to the Levites. And then Numbers, well, that's pretty easy. Basically, it starts with a census and ends with a census. It's about numbers, as we looked at last time. But Deuteronomy, where does it come from? Well, Deuteronomy comes from the Greek name of the fifth book of the Bible. It is the Septuagint's translation. The Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Hebrew phrase, Mishnah Torah. It was a copy of the Torah. And there's a phrase actually in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 18, which talks about how the king is to make a copy of this law, which means a second copy of the law. And in Greek, this is Deuteronomon, second law. And thus the name Deuteronomy comes about in many ways as basically a Greek translation of second law. But that's not actually what's intended in this situation. It wasn't to suggest a different law or anything else, but the instruction from God was that every king was to write his own copy, Mishnah, of the Torah, Mishnah Torah. Now, in the Jewish Bible, it's just known as Devarim, which is just the opening phrase of the book of Deuteronomy, which stands for "These are the words." Now, Deuteronomy contains the original law, but a repetition and amplification as a new generation of Israelites, which have now been wandering in the desert of Sinai for 40 years, prepare to go to take possession of the promised land. It has a renewal, essentially, of covenantal obligations as it prepares for the conquest of Canaan. And what's interesting about Deuteronomy, if you look at it in terms of its structure, it's actually often viewed, because of the influence of a Reformed theologian named Meredith Kline, as a single or a series of sermons by Moses to the people, like a final address before they go into the promised land. And if you see it as a single one, you can see the structure here. It begins with a preamble, a historical preamble. Again, this is reflecting the covenantal structure of an existing treaty format, which was known as a suzerainty treaty, which was an established ancient Near Eastern way of cutting a covenant, where you have a higher or a suzerain, and we have a lower or a vassal party, and basically they covenant together and make an agreement. And in this case, the suzerain is, of course, even greater than just a human person. It is God himself. He is the suzerain, and the people of Israel are the vassal. And we see basically that this is the established sort of structure that outlines the book. It begins with a historical preamble in chapters 1 to 5, followed by a historical prologue, chapter 1, verse 6 to chapter 4, verse 43. And then, of course, the meat of it is the covenant stipulations, the details of the relationship in chapters 4, verse 44 to chapters 26, verse 19. General stipulations and specific stipulations, basically broken into two parts. And then at the end, we have means for covenantal renewal, chapter 27 to 30, with the blessings and curses associated with keeping or not keeping the covenantal structure in chapters 27 verse 1 to chapter 28 verse 68. And then the covenantal ratification and final exhortation of Moses, including the concluding speech, which we find in chapters 29 verse 1 to chapter 30, and the concluding speech in 31 to 34. There's some amazing features and facts about this book. We'll go through them as we go through the daily reviews in our WhatsApp group. And if you're interested in joining that WhatsApp group, you can certainly connect with us and find out more about that. It's a place for you to ask questions. But just some really neat things. Jesus, in the New Testament, it's clear that Jesus actually meditated quite significantly on Deuteronomy. And we know this because when he was driven into the desert by the Holy Spirit and faced the temptations that came by Satan, all of his responses to Satan, all of his answers to Satan's temptations came from the book of Deuteronomy. And so that's really, I think, insightful in and of itself, because it speaks of the value the book was to Jesus in reflecting and deflecting the attacks of Satan. And certainly if Jesus found it useful, we should too. Over and over, the book emphasizes the worship of God from the heart. It's a truly sincere book. And it's also wonderfully, wonderfully gracious in terms of revealing God's heart. And I think this is interesting again. We see this all over the Old Testament when we see the law. The law and the gospel are not separated. They are integrated in together. And the grace of God surrounds all of this. And I think especially meaningful for me is the passage in Deuteronomy 33:27, where it says, "The eternal God is your dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms." So that is the picture of our God as our refuge, and underneath us are his arms upholding us and strengthening us. And so as you read this book this month, I trust that you will take refuge in God and see his grace and his gracious covenantal dealings with his people. And you will be encouraged as you get to know God more as we read the Bible together. May the Lord bless you this month. See you soon.